Hello and noswaith dda. Good evening, although evidently it's not a very good evening weather-wise. I hope we're all glad, I'm sure, that this is a webinar because we wouldn't be turning out of an evening on a night like this, even for John, I think. Diolch yn fawr I bawb sy'n mynychu heno ag ni'n mynd I gael noswaith hynod o ddiddorol, dwi'n siŵr yn olrhain hanes Adran y Gyfraith sydd bellach yn Adran y Gyfraith a Throseddeg yn y Brifysgol yn Aberystwyth, of course. The Department of Law, now the Department of Law and Criminology, is 120 years old. Our current head of department, as many of you may know, and you may have heard him giving talks on different topics, is Professor Emeritws, and the department is going strong. Yn mynd o nerth I nerth. Mae'r adran yn adran fywiog a ni'n falch iawn yn y gyfadran bod hi'n un o'n adrannau ni. So the department has a rich and really varied history and has made a really significant contribution to legal research and teaching in Wales, the United Kingdom and beyond. This presentation tonight will discuss some of the key periods in its history and some of the staff and students who have contributed to its many achievements. It is part of a larger project that John is working on and will result in a publication, in a book that's to be published by the University of Wales Press. So I'm really happy to welcome John Williams, Professor John Williams, tonight. I'm sure many of you know John, as do I myself, and have had the pleasure of working with him. John is now an Emeritus Professor of Law, but of course, during his 43 years in the department, you would never be able to tell by looking at him that he has done 43 years of anything. Ond mae wedi bod yn yr adran am 20 a 2 o blynyddoedd sy'n gyfnod anhygoel. He has been head of department and Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences. He's published widely on law and older people and has spoken at many national and international conferences. John has been an advisor to what is now the Senedd, Welsh Government, Westminster, the Commissioners for Older People in Wales and in Northern Ireland and the United Nations. So quite a range of consultancy there, clearly on the basis of his vast experience in different aspects of law. John currently lives with his wife Carol in rural Ceredigion, along with their 2 dogs, a horse, a fish and a guinea pig. I don't know whether the fish is in a lake or a pond or a jar, but it's certainly there. There's a fish as part of the family. Felly ni'n croesawu John. We're really happy to welcome John to us tonight. Just in the wider context of the Department of Law and Criminology, some dates for your diaries. We will, as part of the celebrations of the 120 years of law at Aberystwyth, we will be holding 2 prestigious dinner events in 2022. The first, Great Hall, the Old Bailey, London, on Saturday, 7th of May, and the next Grand Hall at the National Museum of Cardiff on Friday, 10th of June. So we hope the weather will be friendlier by that point in 2022. So put those dates in your diaries now. We will be recording tonight's session and it will be available after a couple of weeks just for us to process it and get it up on the, I think it's available on a YouTube platform, but it will be recorded tonight. We will also be taking Q&A questions for John at the end of the presentation, but you're welcome to put those questions in the Q&A as either as John talks or after, and I will attempt to put as many of those questions as I can to John. Felly bydd cyfle I chi roi cwestiynau yn y cwestiwn ag ateb, yn holi ag ateb, a gallwch chi wneud hynny tra bod John yn cyflwyno neu wedi iddo fe orffen cyflwyno. A felly gyda hynny o groeso I bawb yma heno, with that much welcome to you all tonight and welcome particularly to John. I'm going to hand over to him to hear his fascinating account of some of the high points in the history of the law department at Aberystwyth.
Welcome, Anwen and noswaith dda. It's a great pleasure to be here for the sake of completeness, the fish does actually live in a fish tank in the house. A very stormy Ceredigion at the moment. We're feeling the brunt of the storm, but we're all safe and sound. So it is very nice to be here, and thank you for the opportunity. Looking at the list, there are many names I do remember, many from my generation as a student, 69 to 72, and many people who I've taught, for better or for worse. I mean, you can pass judgment on that. So I am going to share the screen now, so I will disappear and hopefully you will see the presentation. Good, well, I hope that works. The title is A Source of Strength, Not of Weakness. And that was a statement made by Principal T.F. Roberts, who at the beginning of the history of the department was obviously worried about whether it would actually pay its way, but felt that if it could surmount the initial financial crisis, it would be a source of strength for the university. And I think history has shown that that is the case. As Anwen said, this is part of a bigger project, and I feel like something of a an intruder here because I'm not a real historian. My co-authors, Chris Harding and Richard Ireland, certainly are historians, and I'm very grateful to them for the many conversations that I've had with them on the history of the department. To begin at the beginning, obviously UCW founded in 1872. The first law degree was actually awarded to Gladstone by the newly installed Chancellor, the Prince of Wales, and that was in 1896. On that visit, in fact, the Princess of Wales opened the newly completed Women's Hall, Alexander Hall, which still stands today, although it's being a bit battered by the storms. Not long after that, in 1898, the Court of Governors passed a resolution on the desirability of establishing a law faculty. And from there, we went to a meeting chaired by Lord Justice Vaughan Williams, who again thought it was a good idea. And in 1901, the College Council resolved to establish a faculty of law. Of course, one of the first things they needed were people to run it and people to teach in the department. And this is a statement of the duties of the Professor of English Law. You probably can't see it all in detail there, but the stipend, not the salary, the stipend attached to the chair was to be £300 per annum. And actually looking at the list of duties, it's not radically different to the contract I signed when I became a professor at Aberystwyth. The two key candidates were Thomas Levi. Levi was raised in Aberystwyth from the age of 2. He went to Adran Grammar, studied here at Aberystwyth, and then went to Lincoln College, Oxford.
And I'm so sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
We're not actually seeing the slides. I don't know why that's the case.
Okay.
Have you shared screen?
I have shared the screen. We'll just go out of that for a moment and we'll share the screen again.
Yes, it's working. Great. Thank you so much. Sorry to interrupt.
Can you see it now?
Yes, all good, John. Lovely.
All good. Okay, thank you for letting me know. I would have been going on forever. Totally unaware of that. Thank you, Anwen. If there's any other problem, let me know. When he expressed an interest in applying for the chair of Lord Dicey, the famous Professor A.V. Dicey, told him not to throw away his brilliant gifts in such, in Dicey's words, a remote and insignificant place. Well, Levi did apply, and was successful and became the first head of the School of the Department of Law and the Professor of English Law. A very interesting character. In his inaugural lecture, he outlined his view of law teaching, and this rather nice quotation here, that university teaching of law was more than breeding pettifogging solicitors to work up vexatious litigation. Quite an interesting observation. I think actually it summed up Levi's approach to the teaching of law. It was to serve the profession, of course, and to train lawyers. And Levi spent much of his time talking to trainees, providing development courses for trainee lawyers and for practitioners. But at the same time, he recognized that there was an academic content to law and that universities played an important role in teaching that. The second chair was, Levi was appointed on a salary of 200, or a stipend of £250 per annum. The university rather cleverly saved £50 on his appointment. Jethro Brown, quite a different character. He was previously at Tasmania and University College London, and graduated from St. John's College, Cambridge. And he was appointed Professor of Constitutional and Comparative Law. And it's interesting, comparative law was to some extent very much in its infancy, and Jethro Brown was one of the main people promoting it, certainly within the United Kingdom. Two different characters. Brown, very scholarly in his approach. Levi, quite an interesting character. Yes, he was scholarly, but he also recognized the importance and the need for the department to generate income to support its continuation. There's a couple of interesting photos from the early periods. One is the 1910-11 departmental photo outside the old college. Levi's seen there with his boater, and there are very few photos of Levi. Pretty well all of them, Levi has the boater on his knee. You never actually see him wearing it. And the one on the right of the screen, it's unbeknown to me, but apparently Levi was the coach for the UCW rowing crew. Again, you can see him there, a boater in hand, looking very elegant. Looking at the early years, they were both international in their outlook, and they were very keen to promote the university and the department beyond the shores of the United Kingdom. And to that fact, Levi and Brown attended the International Law Congress at St. Louis as the Wales delegates. And again, it was looking very much at the development of comparative law. Now, throughout its history, the department has been criticized by some people for being in the wrong place. We'll say a bit more about that later on. But as early as 1905, the Western Mail described the law school as a manifest failure financially. I'm not sure where they got their information from, because actually Levi was not doing a bad job in generating income through his continuing education, through his outreach activities in Swansea, in North Wales, which generated a reasonable amount of income that went alongside the various grants the department had received. 1906, Brown resigned. He said with regret he wanted to go back home. He went and eventually obtained a judicial appointment. Principal Roberts expressed regret, but they did not decide, the university did not decide to replace him. So Levi was then the only professor of law at Aberystwyth. But in that same year, Aberystwyth established the summer school, which was for legal trainees. They could come and attend courses put on mainly by Levi. Brown was a little bit reluctant to get involved in this stuff during his time in Aberystwyth. He was quite content to leave it all to Tommy Levi. We move on, and of course, the First World War made a big impact on the department. Intake certainly fell. The outreach program was suspended, and much of the teaching, or pretty well all the teaching, in fact, was left to Tommy Levi, and that was quite a big task. That really took up most of his time. But he did give a public lecture, and I remember when I was a student in '69, when I arrived in '69, there was a weekly public lecture put on for everyone to attend. Well, Levi gave a public lecture on the effect of war on English law. He was a bachelor, and there are many stories about Levi's reputation, and Elliston Morgan would tell those in his usual way, very amusing. But we do know that in 1915, he got engaged to Miss Zoe Grieve from Eastbourne. Not quite sure how that happened, because it kind of predated Tinder and all the other dating apps. So the expectation was he would get married, but alas, that didn't happen. And I think Miss Zoe Grieve married somebody else the following year. So that didn't last too long. Levi was conscious that once the war had ended, the department needed to think about expanding and needed better facilities. It was housed in the old college, and eventually it moved. It had a presence on the sea front, but more staff and better facilities were needed as part of Levi's post-war vision for the department. Sorry, just to go back to the slides there, the tank at the bottom was actually presented to Aberystwyth Town for their efforts during the war. I'm not sure what happened to it after. If we go to the 20s and 30s, some very interesting people went through the department. John van Druten, who wrote I Am a Canberra, which eventually became the basis for the film and the musical Cabaret, was a lecturer for a short period of time at Aberystwyth. Iris de Freitas graduated in 1927. She'd spent longer in Aberystwyth, did a degree, I think, in history, but she was the first woman graduate in the Caribbean. She was the first woman to practice law in the Caribbean, and that was quite an achievement for Iris de Freitas. In recognition of this, the university has named a room in the Humane Library after her, an entirely appropriate thing to do. Arian Evans, very interesting person. She became the first woman president of the North Wales Law Society. A few years ago, her nephew contacted me to say that she was about to celebrate her 100th birthday, and would I send a good wishes from the department, which I did. But it's a fascinating account. As I say, the photograph says a lot. There she is in the middle of all those men in DJs, I think looking very much in charge, but a very lovely lady by all accounts, and it was very nice to touch base with the family. Other graduates in the 30s were Gwynfor Evans and Cledwyn Hughes, both of whom went into politics, became distinguished members of Parliament, and made an important contribution to the development of law in Wales. And then Errol Hall Williams, an interesting person. Hall Williams was in fact a conscientious objector, and he appealed to the panels that existed to decide what would happen to conscientious objectors, and they did actually allow him to complete his degree in 1942. After that, he went into humanitarian work, and indeed he was one of the first people to arrive at Belsen following the end of the war. He didn't say very much about it, and he then went on to Hull, and then to University to College London. But a very interesting individual, some good archive material on him. Levi retired in 1940. The story is, I don't know whether it's true, is that he said to Principal Eva Evans, it would be nice to make it 40 years, to which the principal was, again, allegedly replied, well, 39 years was enough. So Levi went, and I think one has to recognize that he achieved a great deal in establishing the law department as one of the key players in legal education and in the training and development of lawyers throughout Wales. It was difficult, it was financially difficult, financially very challenging, but his energy and his enthusiasm, particularly in the outreach work, really set the foundations for the law department. So we come to the 1940, we need a new professor and a new head of department, and two candidates. One was Glanville Williams and the other was Llywelyn Davies. They were the main contenders for the vacant chair. Both were Welsh, and both had been students at Aber and Cambridge. In the end, the appointment panel, the university decided to go through for Llywelyn. It's interesting to speculate why. Glanville Williams was a conscientious objector. Whether that played any part, we'll never know. But I think Llywelyn had probably shown a greater commitment to legal education in Wales. Now, I guess many people listening will have known Llywelyn. He was quite a different person from Thomas Levi. John Andrews described Levi as a character of thespian dimensions whose personality was irresistible and irrepressible. Llywelyn was a really very gentle man. He was very kindly disposed towards his students, and I'll say a bit more about that later on. There's only one photograph, as far as we know, of Levi and Llywelyn at what we assume was some kind of dinner to celebrate Levi's retirement. A very youthful-looking Llywelyn there on the right of the picture. So 40 years, one head of department, and indeed it was to be another 39 or 40 years before we had a third head of department. Quite an achievement, I think. Second World War, yes, of course, it again disrupted progress in the department and the university. Transport was made increasingly difficult, so Levi in his final year couldn't maintain the outreach program. Many students went off to do war service. Amongst the great names there, Hugh Bevan, who became Professor of Law in Hull, a very eminent child lawyer. Emeritws, again, Liberal politician. David Fawkes, who eventually got a chair in Cardiff, and John Errol Williams, who I mentioned just a moment or two ago. One significant development was that in 1941, Isabel Matson was appointed to a lectureship. Not only was she the first woman graduate of Canterbury University in New Zealand, she was the first woman lecturer in the department. She stayed for 3 years, and then she followed her husband back to New Zealand. And during her time, she published quite a few articles in some quite prestigious journals. The majority who went to war resumed their studies after the war. A notable sad local exception was Roger Ayton Morgan. He completed his first year in 1942 and then joined the RAF. Sadly, his aircraft was shot down and he lost his life in Norway late in April 45. One thing that did happen during the Second World War was that the London University colleges evacuated their students. And University College London sent its students to Aberystwyth. So we had a cohort of Aber students and a cohort of UCL students. Not much is written or recorded about how that worked. There were varying stories as to whether the two groups of students mixed together well or not. As I say, there's not a great deal written as far as we're aware. There aren't any formal records of how this arrangement worked. They were housed in the Ffynhonnell building in Borth, so they had a reasonable journey to come in to the department, presumably by train. This is a picture of the department in 1948. As you can see, it is all men, one woman, sorry, 2 women, 3, 4, sorry, but predominantly male. Llewellyn is there in the front with his usual pose for the photographs, but looking very much the leader of the group, and a great man he was. In the 1950s, things were hard. Llewellyn was supported by 4 members of staff. There was a lot of toing and froing. The rumour was that Llewellyn had a policy of when people had been there 3 or 4 years, he would suggest that maybe they would want to move on to advance their careers. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But there was certainly quite a bit of movement in staff. But one of the interesting people who stayed for a couple of years was Michael Dias, or Mickey Dias. And you may remember Dias on jurisprudence, a student textbook, a very good student textbook. It was a book that was plagiarized by one of his students initially and published under the name of Hughes. That caused uproar in Cambridge, where Mickey went to, and eventually it became Hughes and Dias, and then it became Dias on jurisprudence. Elliston became a student in that year, as did in that period, as did John Morris, 49 to 52. Llewellyn, and again, little is known about his politics, but he did address a Liberal Party meeting in Borth, and he was arguing that the debate around a Welsh Parliament was actually delaying the establishment of a Secretary of State for Wales. Llewellyn was very involved in the Society of Public Teachers of Law and was its president for 1 year. And in 1956, he succeeded in getting the SPTL conference here in Aberystwyth, and by all accounts, a very successful event. The photographs at the bottom, on the left of the screen, there's the rag procession. In the middle, the King's Hall, and many people will be familiar with the King's Hall. Now it has now been demolished for some years, although it took some demolishing. The the big ball, the wrecker ball they were using just bounced off. And it took a lot of work to actually demolish the King's Hall, and then a view of the Aberystwyth Beach in the 1950s. This is an interesting cutting we got from the Courier, 1956. It's a mock trial that took place, we think, in Baker Street. Just trying to work out where the location was from the buildings behind. And the person in the dock was Llewellyn Davies. And there he is with his hat and his overcoat, looking, one might say, quite guilty. The judge, Mr. Brian Heath, and other names there, David Lewis Evans, Carl Hansen, but hopefully we can get a better copy of the cutting. But Llewellyn was certainly up for that kind of thing. I mentioned movement of staff, and this is just a quick list of some of the people who went through Aberystwyth. Joseph Unger, he was so popular with students in the late 40s that when he decided to move to Birmingham, there were student protests. And the principal was petitioned to encourage Unger to stay, but he did go. Other names, Dyers there I mentioned, Ken Simmons, Harry Calvert, Bernard Rudden, Peter North, and Alan Dashwood. Say more about Alan a little later on. But there are a number of very eminent people who became very eminent academics who started their careers in Aberystwyth, staying not too long, but then moving on to senior posts in other universities. It would be quite wrong to talk about the history of the department without mentioning our very close links with Malaysia. We have links with many countries, Nigeria, the States, Canada, Singapore, China, and certainly many countries in Europe. The Malaysian link has always been rather special, and we've had some very eminent Malaysians study law at Aberystwyth. The Tuanku Mores, the top picture on the right, is the ruler of Negeri Sembilan in Malaysia. He was a student 67 to 70, and I know is a very loyal member of the Malaysian alumni group. Tun Mahamed Salih bin Abbas graduated in 1954-55, and had a very eminent judicial and a political career. Tun Mohammed Ghazali bin Shafi, again, he held a number of government roles, including the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Home Affairs. And there's a very nice beginning to his autobiography, where he says, "It was while as a student of law at the University College of Wales, Aberystwyth, that I began to think of a greater union comprising the states of the Federation of Malaya, Singapore, Sarawak, Brunei, and North Borneo." So his dream of a Malaysian state started here in Aberystwyth. It's nice to think, but we also now, the arrangements of things have changed. We have very close links with two big education providers in Malaysia, Brickfield Asia College and Help University, and we still recruit in the region of 50, 60, 70 students per year. It's a link that we value, and it's a very active alumni society, and it's great to work with them. If we go to the 60s, one thing about the 60s was the rapid expansion in universities. We went from 24 in 1960 to well over 50 in 1969, with places like Sussex, Kiel, York, and Lancaster coming on stream. Also, the polytechnics, 65, they were able to award CNNA degrees. And many polytechnics had law schools, so it was becoming much more competitive, much more many more departments were in existence, and provision varied too across the sectors. So I think probably we were beginning to feel the heat in terms of recruitment. Some of the photos on the top there, the one I particularly draw your attention to was Galloway and Morgan. And again, many of you may remember Galloway and Morgan in Pearse Street, where every year at the beginning of the session, you went to Galloway's to buy your Cheshire and 5 foot, your Smith and Hogan's, and you had to go upstairs, rickety stairs, onto what was a rickety balcony and get your books from a shelf. It's a very narrow balcony, and it's somewhat amazing that nobody actually fell through it and landed in the Romance language section below. And the one on the right is of a Lord Dinner. The people from the right of the photo, Bernard Davis. I'm afraid we don't know who the next person is, but the person after her is somebody called Nicholas Swingler, who was in post for a short period of time. And Swingler was famous. He's now a poet, I think, but he was famous for writing a piece in one of the Sunday papers saying that universities were funk holes for skivers. Not something that went down terribly well with Llewellyn or with the powers that be. But the other highlights of the 60s, Peter Jones became the first recipient of the Lord McNair Scholarship, which enabled him to study in the Hague Academy. And I think Peter's father was a graduate in 1919, so a second generation. The Robbins report suggested or proposed that a rapid expansion in university education, and that had implications for the later development of the department. And then we have Leo Apsey in 1966, and here again is one of the naysayers of the department, having a go at the department. He said in a parliamentary debate, "I do not believe that a law faculty removed to Aberystwyth, far away from the centres where barristers' chambers exist, where assizes are, away from where the actual working of the law takes place, is the best place. I think that it fails as a consequence to attract lecturers of the distinction and numbers required by genuine law faculty." I think his agenda was he's promoting legal education for South Wales. Emlyn Hewson, Liberal MP, said he's quite misleading, and I'm not sure you are still allowed to use the word misleading in Parliament, in what he says about the law faculty at Aberystwyth. "I rise to protest. Government front bench would be very much depleted without the graduates of that law school." So it was an interesting debate and a rather unnecessary attack by Apsey on the department. The other event of the 60s was the appointment of John Andrews as the second professor in law. So Llewellyn retired in 1970. It was quite an emotional time for him, for Mary, and I think many students remember fondly the kindness of both Mary and Llewellyn. And in particular, at the end of every term, students were invited round to Rossacorn, where they lived, for tea. Always in the garden, never rained, but it was a lovely occasion. Mary baked Welsh cakes for us, and it was a lovely way to unwind after the examination. Mary died in April '81, leaving a bequest to the department, and we've used that to develop mooting within the law school. So who would be the new head of the department? Well, it was either John Andrews or the new professor, Howell Moseley. Howell had been a lecturer in the department in the early 60s. He's what I call a reluctant lawyer because from what he says, and particularly his article in Nation Cymru, not long before his death, it seemed he wasn't particularly keen on doing law or indeed in being a professor of law. But yes, he applied and he was appointed professor. The issue wasn't really resolved. Gronwy Daniel was the principal. It wasn't really resolved until 1973-74, when John was appointed head of department. Gronwy was very keen on creating stronger links between the profession and academia. And of course, Howell, as a practicing barrister, may have been an attractive possibility. But John was appointed, and I think John was a man who understood higher education, had a passion, and still has a passion for higher education, and I think saw what the challenges were in the 1970s: greater competition, the importance of research, which to date hadn't featured that prominently in the profile of the department. So I think probably cometh the hour, and John was appointed. Also in 1970, the Cambrian Law Review was established. Staff editors John Trice and Clifford Hall. This is and I think Alison's with us on this webinar. We think it's the celebratory dinner of the 10th edition. Again, you see Gareth Owen, the principal, John, Bethy Owen and Elizabeth Andrews, with John Baxter, myself and Alison in the background. Just looking at some of the people in the 1970s, the early 1970s, Hugh Beale at the top there on the left. He went to Warwick and eventually became a law commissioner. Particular mention there of Ian Fletcher. Ian sadly died in July 2018. He left Aber in the 80s with Letitia Crabb, his wife and family. Ian went to QMC and then UCL and held very prestigious chairs there, and was well regarded, very well regarded in insolvency law internationally. Some may remember him as a cricketer. He also wore a bow tie, and he also drove a very nice Sunbeam Alpine. Now, by this time, of course, we'd moved to Llandinam, to the buildings just below, to the rooms just below the towers. But one of the first things that John Andrews really succeeded in getting underway was a new building to house the law department. And this was the Humane Building, which was opened in 1975. It's shared with many of the arts departments. But the big thing was it had a much larger law library. Some of you may remember the old Llandinam library, which was tucked away at the end of the main library. Well, here we had much more space and much better teaching rooms. It was a great achievement. According to the minutes of the Buildings Committee, the dimensions were reduced by about 6 inches all round to save costs. So I don't know what impact that had on the use of the building, but that was decided. And this is a photo, and I think it's probably 78, 79. We see in the front row Ewan Davis, who's now the Vice-Chancellor of Bangor University. It would be remiss of me not to mention the many law librarians that we've had in Aberystwyth. The law library was opened there by the Lord Chancellor, Lord Elwyn Jones, in 1976. David Jones was the first law librarian. He went to the House of Lords, I think probably poached by Lord Elwyn Jones. So whether they had a chat during the opening and David was persuaded to go, I don't know. William Hines, I can't find Bill Hines. I can't find an image for him. My apologies, Bill, but a law librarian who really introduced us to technology. And some of you will remember the joint sessions Bill and I did on Lexis, which I think the way we did them would now probably be a health and safety risk because of the wires that were being draped everywhere. Bill was followed by Lillian Stevenson. Bill went on to greater things in the library in Aberystwyth. Lillian Stevenson, a law graduate. Lillian made a very strong contribution to the development of the library and also to the links between the library and the academic staff, and that was very important. Her services to law librarianship were recognised in 2014 when she was elected by her peers in the British and Irish Association of Law Librarians as Law Librarian of the Year. Lloyd Roddick is now the law librarian. He shares the responsibilities. He has other responsibilities as well, but of course, he works in a completely different environment from the one David Jones worked in, and it's really interesting the way in which law librarianship has developed over the years. But very important contribution to our work. If we go to the 1980s, just note a couple of things there. One, the first Lord Maurice of Borthwick guest lecture was delivered by Lord Scarman, Britain and the Protection of Human Rights. A very memorable event. Lord Maurice, who died in the late 70s, had left a sum of money for lectures to be given in each of the law schools in Wales. They were very good. The other thing was the Erasmus, the links with a number of European universities. And it was wonderful. We had students from all over Europe come to us, and students from Aberystwyth go abroad. And I know many students who went abroad found it an absolutely wonderful experience, as did the students who came here, many of whom returned to do postgraduate work. Very sad that that has gone, and an important link between Wales and Europe no longer exists. There was also a Lord Maurice of Borthwick conference on illegal intervention in family life. And as with Llywelyn, John had been very active in the SPTL, and in 1989, they held their conference here. Well, John's period of office came to an end in 1992. He became the chief executive of the Welsh Funding Council, leaving behind him a very strong legacy. A department that was confident in itself, a department that established its place amongst law schools in the UK and beyond, a good recruiter, and a department where research had really taken off from the days of the 60s and the 70s. Dick Kidner was appointed head of department, Dick, many of you will have been taught by Dick. Greg Van still lives in Aberystwyth. I still see him now and again. In 1996, Linda Warren was appointed to a chair in environmental law, and this was part of a strategic decision by the department to develop environmental law, and Linda, along with Chris Rogers, Bill Howarth, Brian Jack, and a number of other people, developed quite a centre of expertise on environmental matters. Of course, the big development was the Government of Wales Act and the creation of the National Assembly for Wales, and the impact that would have on legal education. Dick stood down in 1998, and I was appointed head of department. Picture of the 1994, they all look very happy. Unlike the 1960s and 70s, not many of the guys wearing ties. The 2000s, two prestigious conferences, Socio-Legal and the British Legal History Conference were held at Aberystwyth. And big development, 2005, the department was renamed as the Department of Law and Criminology. Alan Clark was the first professor of criminology, an important development that built on some of the work that, for example, Richard, Chris Harding, Jane Morgan, when she was with us in the department, had started. Chris became head in 2006. We then established a legal practice course. Again, sorry, a bit like Frank Sinatra, yet another return. I was appointed interim head of department in 2008. 2009, of course, we're very pleased that one of our graduates, Carwyn Jones, was appointed as First Minister. Importantly, the Mooting Society, they played a very important role in the development of the department. It's a group run by students. They're fantastic. They participated in many moots, national and international, and they also organize an internal mooting competition. And mooting will be central to the development of the law room in the old college. And we're very grateful, as we are, to the students who run the Law Society and the annual law dinner. And the final decade, Noel Cox was appointed chair and head of department. And it was very nice that in 2011, we celebrated the 100th birthday of David Jenkins. There was a celebratory party in the National Library. We also moved in 2013 to a new building, a new campus, the old College of Librarianship building on the Llanbadarn campus, and became part of the Institute of Management, Law and Information Studies. Personally, I quite enjoyed being over in Llandin. It was an interesting building architecturally, but we did move back in 2018. On Noel's departure, I came back as interim head of department. The opening of the building in Llanbadarn, which we named the Elliston Morgan Building, who better to open it than Elliston himself? He had an enjoyable day, as did we all. Developments in the department, a family legal clinic, Dr. Olasanya is running that and very highly thought of. A major grant of 1.2 million to a project, Davis Choice project, looking at elder abuse. And as I say, the return of the department to Hugh Owen. It was very nice in 2018. We had the Legal Wales Conference in Aberystwyth. It was the first one held here. It was a dreadful day, but people attended, people enjoyed, and it was a wonderful occasion. And we hope that we can attract Legal Wales back to Aberystwyth in the near future, although not on a stormy day like today. And to end, Emma Lewis was appointed head of department in 2019, a practitioner, but also a very scholarly gentleman, a bard, and a superb leader of the department, taking it forward. The very formal 2014 graduation year. Just to close, a couple of quotes. Nature of the community and the staff of the department, the geography of the town and the strong sense of tradition have done much to retain the values, principles and standards which Levi and Brown set at the beginning of a century of legal education. This was John Andrews writing in 2001 at the centenary celebrations of the department. And my final thoughts, 120 years of success in teaching, research and public engagement. Not bad for a department which, in the words of Dicey, was a remote and insignificant place. Thank you very much.
Diolch yn fawr, John, for a fascinating talk. I made a whole load of notes, which I'll have to follow up with you later. And there is a question in the chat around it's sort of a comment, I think quite a stimulating little comment. I wonder if Llywelyn's appointment in 1940 was due in no small part to the fact that he was on the staff at LSE at the time. Did his HOD, David Hughes Parry, a recurring name in the history of ABBA, fix things? Question mark, exclamation.
Well, that's an interesting theory, and theories there are many, and that's one we might look at. I mean, it's interesting looking at the two CVs. They were different, but each had much to offer, and I think probably other things aside, it may well be that Llywelyn had this very strong commitment to developing legal education, a bit like Levi, who wanted to come back to Wales despite what Dicey said. Levi wanted to work to promote legal education in Wales. But yes, that's an interesting theory, yes.
There's another question come in, and we are short on time, but I'm going to put it to you now, and it's interesting, and it sort of touches on something I would also like to ask. So it asks, with changing technology and the introduction of tuition fees, to what extent has learning and teaching of law changed? Are 21st century law students different from 19th century law students?
Yeah, that's an interesting, very interesting question. And I think there's no doubt that legal education and law students have changed a lot. Technology has played its part. When I was a law student, the idea of getting access to any number of cases on a particular point of law was, well, just a pipe dream, because we had to go to the law library to look up the hard copies, and tough luck if somebody else had the law report. So I think access to information is far greater, although that in itself can create problems. Too much information. Methods of teaching have changed, of course. We now record lectures. I think the problem there is that we don't want students to not learn how to take notes, because if you're going to be a lawyer, that seems to be very important. I think some of the core things remain the same. That law students hopefully are taught to be critical, are taught to be creative. And I think you can see that in Levi's approach. I think you can see it right through the 60s, 70s, up to the present date. The idea of not accepting. I was quite often not told off, but it was pointed out to me in university committees, well, you're a lawyer, John, you would argue that. And well, yeah. I took that as a compliment. Derek Lewis Morgan did actually apologize for saying that to me once, but I told him it was a compliment. It's the way lawyers think, and I don't think that has changed. We've got to be critical. We've got to be analytical. And it was interesting when the Quality Assurance Agency asked us to identify key skills in the teaching of law. And really, I think they were the same key skills that were unspoken in Levi's day, but they were skills that students acquired.
I'm going to just do a few others. There's an interesting comment here. The unidentified woman on the Nicholas Swingler slide was Julie Pierce, Bernard Davis's girlfriend before he met Christine Mummery.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes, yes.
That was Peter Quinn. Should you need to?
Yes, Peter Quinn, because I think, Peter, we talked about this, and I think the name had gone out of my head. Yes, because yes, Bernard later married Christine, and then they went to Canada. That might have been the dinner that made the Courier, because Christine's coat was stolen from the cloakroom, and that made big headlines in Courier, but also in the Cambrian News. But yes, thank you, Peter. Thank you.
And then, John, I just wanted to ask you on the back of that question around how you see the changes and what the key characteristics of a law student are. I just wondered, during the presentation, you sort of referred to a few key political figures that have come from the law department at Aberystwyth, Gwynfor Evans, Cledwyn Hughes, and then finished closing with Carwyn. And I wondered whether you see an affinity between, or does a training in law offer something specific to a political career?
That's interesting. I mean, it's always said that Parliament is full of lawyers. I don't think it is. But I mean, we've got, I think, 3 graduates in the current. There's Raymond, Sean Bailey, and sorry, the name of the third person's escaped me. But also, you look back, Elvin Llwyd, Nick Bourne, of course, was Sylvia Paisley. In the process of trying to draw up a list. Yes, I mean, obviously lawmaking, I think, is going to be, having the background as a lawyer is going to be helpful there. I think in part, and this is going back many years, not necessarily now, although there have been recent cases that may suggest otherwise, but it was also quite a useful career. And to some extent, Parliament in the earlier days was designed around people practicing at the bar. The timing of sessions and so on were basically when the courts finished. But yes, I think there is kind of a natural attraction for lawyers to want to get involved in debate, to want to be involved in making law. And I think it's very nice that so many of our graduates have gone into politics, either within Wales or UK-wide.
There are a lot of really nice comments coming in. Somebody is saying, thanks for a great talk. It's good to see you. You were my international law tutor back in the 90s. So that's somebody who's there, remembers you there, John. And also nice comment, how many remember that it was actually an ex-Aber student, Hywel Cerrig-Jones, that was responsible for setting up the Erasmus scheme.
Yes,
and
indeed, yes. And deeply disappointed it's ended too.
Yes, and there's another comment. John Davis Borchan used to say that you could travel from North to South Wales, whatever Absi said, in 1966 without leaving a constituency held by an Aber law graduate.
Yeah,
so that's something too. So there are just wonderful lecture, just whole load of really appreciative comments in here. Somebody is asking, can they have the dates for the dinners, and we'll make sure those are circulated to all that are here tonight in June. I think it was May and June from memory, May the 7th and 10th of June 2022, but we'll make sure you're all aware of those. So I think it's been a fascinating, I have to say I've really enjoyed it. And of course the law department at Aberystwyth, as in many institutions, is a really key department in the whole life force, I think, of the university as a whole. And we're just having a comment coming in here. A warm hello and good morning from Malaysia. Thank you, John, for this wonderful lecture. I still have a lovely photo of the prom that remains the background of my virtual classes that piques the interest of my undergraduates. And I'm sure I won't be pronouncing this right, but this is Jaspal Kaur Sadhu Singh, I think, who's sending that comment in. So thank you so much to everyone. The appreciation is really, really clear from all these comments, and I can feel the warmth towards the department coming through. And we're very lucky to have somebody like John on hand who is so sort of eloquent and at ease with us in giving us the history of this really important department that continues to be at the heart of the University at Aberystwyth. Felly diolch o galon, John, a diolch I bawb sy wedi mynychu, and I look forward to chairing another session with you soon, looking at another aspect of life at Aberystwyth. Just a closing comment as we sort of farewell. It's from Roderick Davis. I remember having a lively discussion with Alan Dashwood in the Central at the Law Department evening on the topic of Welsh nationalism. Gyfraith Gwynfor joined in, and Alan was emphatically against it based on his experience in South Africa. And, you know, going back to the remote and insignificant place, it's almost as if that gives Law Tabor its significance in a sense, isn't it? And how wonderful to think that a dream of a Malaysian state came, sort of the seeds for that were sown at Aber. And I think you gave us a real flavor and understanding of why that's the case across the decades in terms of the students and fascinating staff members who have led that department, including yourself, John. So I think, thank you so much for tonight. Diolch I bawb am fynychu, and see you soon.